Hey everybody, it's episode 50, and I finally get a chance to do what I wanted to do for a while, which is talk about session zero and the social contract related to it. I won't say this is a definitive guide, but we're going to talk about game setup, the decisions that need to be made, character creation, logistics, a whole bunch of stuff. Hi, I'm Carl with Tabletop Tango, and if you like what you hear, what you see, like and subscribe. We're all about kind of doing some deeper dives into some RPG topic. So today I want to talk about Session Zero and the social contract that goes along with setting up your new RPG, new campaign. If you been gaming with your group a long time, some of these questions may not be something to talk about because you already know. But if you're new, have new gamers, these are a lot of ideas that you can use to make sure everybody's on the same page, everybody's thinking the same thing. So there's really four elements that I think of. There's the kind of the game structure, how it's set up, things like what rules are we using, what's the feel of the game, that sort of thing. There's player expectations and GM expectations, which are things like lines and veils, the tone, or how people are going to interact with each other during the game, that sort of thing. There's logistics, simple stuff. Where are we even playing? Logistics of the game. And then finally, there's character creation. Now, a lot of people, they talk about session zero as being just character creation and having the players come together with a common goal or a common idea. Again, I think of this as a bigger, broader question. And so some of these things I talk about may be more session -1 or things you talk about before you get to a session zero, but I wanted to put them all together in a package so that you have all the information you need. So let's start off with that game structure. So some of the things to talk about is the kind of game you're going to play. What's the setting? What's the genre? That sort of thing. The structure of the adventure or the adventures. So is this going to be a big epic campaign? Is this a monster of the week? Is this something in between? Is it open world exploration? You want to make sure everybody's on the same page as to the kind of game that you're going to play so that everybody is enjoying it and knows what to expect as you're going through it. Tone is always a big deal. So the tone of the game, is it actions always present? There's a lot of battle. Is it more talking it through, role playing? Is it horror? Are the characters expected to die anyway all the time or go insane? Or is it more the characters are heroes and they're going to save the world? Totally different things. And if your players are coming in feeling like they're going to be epic heroes and you're playing a game that's gothic horror, there's not a match there, and you really should have that conversation. How deadly is the game going to be? I touched upon it when we talk about the horror, but is it death around every corner like the old school games where you get the 0 hit points and you're just dead? Or is it more like the modern games where there's a lot of saving throws around before you die and you're expected that you're probably going to have challenges, but you're overcoming those challenges, and ultimately your players are leveling up. So there's a little bit of difference between those. Really have to talk to the players, and GM needs to be on the same page because nothing ruins the game if you spend a lot of time making your character and backstory, and this is a throwaway. Characters are throwaway, and you don't want it to be attached to them. Totally got to keep that in mind when you're figuring this stuff out. So let's modify. They'll go a little bit up in the notes. Next thing is, how are you going to handle player-to-player conflict? Are you expecting that the players are only against the world, that the party is cohesive, everybody gets along, or are you expecting there's going to be sort of party-to-party conflict? Even getting up to each attacking each other or going against their best interest. That'll ruin the game if not everybody is completely on the same page here, because obviously if you're looking to grow your character and work as a cohesive unit and someone else has got a deep dark secret that they're working against the group, that is just going to ruin the game. So definitely need to talk about that. And then finally, sort of in the game logistics, how much narrative control are you going to give to players? You need to talk about that up front. So I'm not talking railroading necessarily, but are you going to be describing how things happen, or are you going to let the players describe it? You had an epic hit. What did that look like, as opposed to the GM saying, "Oh, what epic hit! You flipped around and you stabbed that goblin and it was really cool." That's important. It may seem like a trivial thing, but it's really important to some players to be able to do that. And if the game master is deciding that how all that action takes place, it's going to decrease their enjoyment of the game, because they'll feel like it takes a little bit of their player agency away. So that's kind of the game structure and the things you should talk about with respect to that. Then comes the player expectations and the GM expectations. This is more in that social contract sort of zone. What do you expect to be the behaviors and how things should go? So first thing you should always talk about is the concept of lines and veils. So a line is something that you absolutely are not going to have happen in your game. You can't cross that line. A veil is something that's allowed in the game, but you're going to fade to black before you get into the details of what's going on. So let's say you have torture, and everybody agrees that that's a line. We're just not going to have torture in our game. Never going to happen. The game master is going to avoid it. The players aren't going to suggest it. That's a line we're not going to cross. A veil might be, yeah, we're going to allow torture in the game, but we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to role play that out. It's just going to be, I caught the goblin leader. We're going to torture him. Okay, roll the dice on the intimidation roll or whatever, and okay, we got the information we needed, but we're going to fade to black on that instead of role playing out all the nasty things we're going to do. So that's really in your game, and you need to talk about that with the players because that's going to be a big thing as far as comfort level. And then related to that is, are you going to leverage the X card or not? If you're playing with your group a long time, probably don't need it. You probably already know what, are their hot buttons and what makes them tick. But if it's a new group, you can decide whether you're going to use the X card. Now, for those who don't know, the X card is this concept of if you hit something that's uncomfortable, that you don't want to role play through, and maybe it didn't come up when you were originally talking about it, you can hit the X card. And sometimes it actually is a physical card. Sometimes I think it should be more if you're doing online gaming, maybe as a quick note to the game master in a private chat. But the idea is, hey, I'm uncomfortable with this. Can we rewind a little bit, or can we just move to the next scene and not deal with this anymore? So that's something to talk about. Kind of related, but the language and how people are going to conduct themselves, set those expectations right up front. As is like we can swear and carry on and do whatever we want to the nth degree, and we are all okay with that. It's not a big problem. Or if somebody's more sensitive to say, hey, let's keep the language and let's keep the behavior sort of above board and not, get into that gutter because it makes me uncomfortable and and I'm not willing to role play that way. Again, a little trivial, but it's something to make sure everybody's on the same page to maximize their enjoyment. What are your expectations on how the characters are going to work outside of the game? So is your game going to have a lot of external role playing? And with online now and all the tools, you can have chats, you can have forums, you can have all sorts of things where the players can interact with each other outside of the actual physical session that you're having. But you need to make sure everybody's on the same page. Personally, when I'm in a game, I really don't like that because I, work for a living and I have a lot of stuff that's going on and I just don't have time to get on a Discord server and chat it up and, role play out things. I really need to do that at the game as a player. Game Master, very similar. I don't have time to keep up with player questions as much as I'd like to. So when I'm talking about this, it's not necessary. You can do some in-game conversations. That's absolutely up to you guys, but it won't affect what I'm doing in the main game. Some of the other things that you might want to talk about is the level of in-character role-playing. Are you expecting the players to always be in character, to do all their conversations in character, or are you completely okay with out-of-character conversation? We're going to talk about this. Okay, great, you did, versus role-playing that out. So again, you may think it's kind of trivial, but these things can really bog down a game if in the middle of something you say, oh, okay, you guys should be role-playing that out. And they go, well, that's not something we do. We normally just talk it out and out of character. And that drives also into some of these discussions as to when things are happening like a combat and it's only a 6-second round or a 10-second round. Are you going to let the players do that out of character meta conversations like, hey, you should do this, I should do that, let's do this strategy. It's only 10 seconds. Are you going to allow that? Or are you going to be more, hey, what are you doing? You got to decide now, pay attention, get ready to go. Uh, Very much defining those expectations are really important. And it's maybe not a session 0 thing. Maybe it's, hey, we need to talk through as we're starting this game and we get into the first combat. Hey, this is something we should talk about. This is something we're going to do. Related to sort of that in character, out of character is how much metagaming are you going to allow in between players or using outside knowledge? Are you going to get really strict, or is the group, and when I say you, I'm a little bit's this game master, but it's really the group. Is the group going to get really bent out of shape if people are using meta knowledge? Hey, you're supposed to be the stupid barbarian. Why are you remembering how the Sudoku puzzle works to solve this problem? You can't do that. You need to role play as the dumb old barbarian. Or are you allowing some metagaming to happen? I personally don't care if you metagame. It's a game. It's supposed to be fun. And if you have a lot more fun by trying to solve that puzzle as a group, even though, this is the dumb barbarian or something else, I'm totally okay with it. But I'm much more flexible than some other game masters probably in that regard. I don't care. But I set that expectation that I'm not going to get bent out of shape about that. With the social contract, you need to also talk up front about how we're going to handle problem players. If you feel like there's something, somebody's disruptive, somebody's not driving the game in the way you want, set the expectations like, hey, I'm going to pull you aside. We're going to have a conversation. Or no, we're going to talk it out at the table. Or if you're uncomfortable, you should private message me. Whatever it is, make sure everybody feels really comfortable with that. It's kind of that, do I have an open door policy? Sort of that management 101 thing to allow players to come to you with any issues. How are you going to handle that? Set that stage, set that expectation up front, and make sure it's on the table that people know they can come to you, provide you feedback or ask you questions or whatever, and that's totally okay. Just make sure that that's on the table and everybody knows. Getting away from kind of the contract, also into player expectations and the game master expectations is, how are you going to adjudicate things? Are you doing rules as written? Absolutely doesn't matter. We'll look it up. If I don't know the rule, we're going to look it up. Do you allow for players to suggest how the rules work? Or is like, nope, I make the rulings and that's just it. Are you going to do fast rulings? If I don't know the rule, I'm just going to say, hey, roll this die, call it good. We'll go back and read it later because we don't want to change the flow of the game. These things can be, taking people out of immersion or what have you. It's based on how the players and the game master work together. When I talk to players, I go, I'm totally okay with you guys throwing the rules out, looking them up. My brain doesn't work as well as it used to, so I don't remember all the rules, and I forget them at times. Even though I play a lot of Savage Worlds and it's a much smaller book, I still forget the nuances. And so I'm okay if players say, hey, wait a second, that doesn't work that way. And I'm okay with us stopping and looking things up, because I'm also okay with players doing a lot of out-of-character conversations and using some metagaming. So all that comes together. Nobody's worried about us looking up a rule before we roll the social conflict stats. They're not going to say, oh, wow, I was role-playing really great, and now you kind of stopped it. Everybody at my table is sort of recognizing that's the way we do things, and they're okay with it. So looking at that, that is kind of the social contract, the session 0 discussion around players and game masters' expectations. Then the next thing we can talk about is logistics. This is a little more easy topic because it's really things like, if somebody's missing the game, what are we going to do? If somebody misses, we're still going to play. Okay, great. If 2 people miss, well, then we'll do something else. Hey, you need to tell me a couple days in advance that you're going to miss the game, or you have some other obligation. If somebody misses the game and you keep playing it, are they going to get experience points? Are they going to level up based on that adventure, or is it like, hey, they're out of luck? Do they still get treasure? All those things can really get people upset if it's like, hey, I had babysitter back out on me. It was an emergency, and here I'm getting penalized for it. They need to know up front. You need to all agree as a group of players. And kind of related to that is, if somebody drops out, how do we bring a new player in? Is it something where everybody gets a vote? Is it just, hey, we find a friend, we'll bring them in, the game master chooses, we'll do a looking for group online, what have you. That you should also talk to the players so they feel comfortable that when you bring a new player in, they understand how it's going to work. Responsibilities of everyone is something to also talk about. And I'm saying across the board. Where are we playing? Who's bringing the snacks? Who's responsible for what? If there is a Discord and people are doing discussions, who's responsible for summarizing that, bringing it to Game Master? Who keeps the party loot? Who takes care of all these things? Talk about that up front. And some of this is more of a player conversation than a game master conversation, but everybody should be on the same page as to where everybody keeps their money. Well, no, we're all going to pool it. Nope, we're going to do this. Can be during the beginning of the game, but it's something to talk about before you get too far and everybody gets upset because their gold got in the pool, but someone else's didn't, and so they couldn't buy something. It's just kind of ridiculous, but it's something to talk about. Link the sessions. How long are you going to play? Are you just going to play until you hit a milestone? Is it absolutely got to be 4 hours? That's a big deal from a game master standpoint, because if you're getting close to something and it's going to end in the first hour of the session or first 2 hours, are you going to be expected to be able to go to the next one? If that's the case, well, then you're going to set the expectation with the players that, hey, I need to know kind of where you're going at all times so I can always be prepped a couple steps ahead, as opposed to just prepping what's happening at the time. So conversation to have so that everybody's on the same page. And if the game ends early, it's just the way it's going to be. That's just the way it's going to be. Finally, kind of a big one is the running of the game. Are you going to allow for cell phones at the table? Are you going to allow for when people roll the dice, it's got to be on the table to count, little things like that. How are you going to handle the ready for turn concept? So every player, as you're going through, if a player's not ready, are you going to skip them and come back to them? Are you going to just say, hey, you've got 10 seconds to make a decision, because that's how things work in the real world, 10-second rounds, you don't have a lot of time to think. You've got to be ready. What are you going to do about players when they're whispering and talking in the dungeon? Do we open the door? Should we check for traps? Are you going to say, oh, that's something that just happens and it's not a big deal? Or are you going to say, hey, anything you do in the dungeon possibly could be heard. You're doing things in character, or even if you're out of characters, those discussions are happening and somebody might hear you. Just to make sure everybody's kind of on the same page so no one gets surprised when they're talking through a plan and suddenly the door burst open because the monster hurt them. Same thing for searching. Are you expecting people to tell you exactly where they're searching before you make that notice roll or search roll or whatever? Or is it just, hey, I come in the room, I'm searching. Okay, let's roll the dice and see what you have. If you're not clear about that up front, and then you start being arbitrary or changing it as you go, players are going to be upset. It's like, hey, I searched this room, I found something. The next one, you expect me to look under the bed to find the clue, but I didn't know to do that, and so I kind of got screwed over. Have those conversations. Make sure everybody understands how you're running the game or how you expect the players to interact with the game. Important stuff. And then finally, the thing that everybody thinks about with respect to session 0 is character creation. That's absolutely important, that everybody comes together and has a conversation about how their players are put together. Now, that could be online where you're all just saying, hey, here's what I think I'm going to be, here's what I think is going to be important, and then everybody agrees. But it's nice to come together in a session 0 and make a cohesive party. Do we have the right participants? Do we have people who are duplicating things that they don't need to duplicate? Or maybe it's okay. They're all FBI agents, so they all should have investigation and they all should have those kinds of skills. Or is it a D&D game and we need the healer and we need this and we need that, and we want to make sure that we have a cohesive party, so everybody's got to be on the same page. How do we make our backstories interact? Okay, hey, it's okay to be separate, but are we going to link each other in a way that there's a reason why we're adventuring, or there's a reason we have this common goal. And there's a way of doing that that's kind of interesting, is where you can have players answer questions between them during that session 0. So for example, you can ask them, hey, name a person on your sheet, either living or dead, that was a relative or you had a strong relationship with. Is there a mystery in your character's life that you want to solve? Is there an ongoing obligation or something that you owe somebody that you need to do? Is there a crime that you've done in the past that nobody knows about? You have a deep, dark secret. Cool little questions that help build out the backstory of a character. You can also then do questions between party members to get some kind of cool interaction or connection. So you could ask questions like, your character helped another character. What did you do? Your character received help from another character. What did that look like? Your character had a very exciting moment that involved another character. What was that moment? And maybe they would describe a battle they both were in or something along those lines. Your character has a secret that's shared with another character. Your character has relatives, whether they're distant or living or dead, that are shared, that are common with another character. And you can get to a point that says, hey, there is a conflict between your character and some other character. What does that conflict look like? Now, be careful, obviously, if you want a cohesive unit, that conflict can't be their blood feuding and they're going to kill each other at the first moment. But there might be, hey, this person is bloodthirsty and likes to kill people, and this person is all about saving lives and taking prisoners instead of killing them. And they were in a battle together, and those two things came in conflict. And so that'll be a conflict within the game, but you developed it as part of that session 0. So cohesiveness, the party understands where everybody stands. There's some great questions that build relationships, or it helps the character or the players think about their character's backstory in a way that helps the game master have hooks to go with. You can talk about writing that novel for your backstory and never have one piece of information that a game master can pull out and use to enhance the game. So that's important to talk about. So what did I go through? This was a kind of a longer video, but we went through the 4 kind of sections of the game. So looking at my notes, game structure, what's the game look like, tone, deadliness, those sorts of things, player expectations, that social contract around lines and veils, how things are going to be run, what's the expectations. Then we have the logistics. Some of it's simple. How do we, where do we meet and what do we do? Some of it's a little more complicated. How is, certain things going to be handled? And then finally, that character creation where everybody comes together and builds those relationships, builds a cohesive party, or not a cohesive party if that's the game you're playing. But all these things come together. And again, like I said, some of them aren't session 0. Some of them might be session -1. But the idea is all these come together and all these questions are answered, whether they're implicit because you know your players or it's explicitly discussed. It turns into a great RPG campaign because there is no hurt feelings or, hey, that's not how I thought things were going to run. That's what I got. So I don't know if it was definitive. I don't know if it covered everything, but that's how I think about session 0 when I'm doing a new campaign. So again, I'm Carl with Tabletop Tango. If you liked what you saw, like and subscribe, and we will talk to you next time. Yay, episode 50. Bye.